We are live. Hey there, friendlies. How's up? Welcome to the, I believe, fourth episode of the Unnamed Outdoor Panel Series. This series where I get to talk about things that I am excited about with people that I respect. Tonight, we have three great guests. We have Kevin Callan. He's the author of 13 books. His latest book is self-published, which is interesting. That's Once Around Algonquin, which I don't have yet, Kevin, but I'm working on that. I've also got Pine Martin, or Martin Pine, on. He's got a large following. A lot of people discovered Crownland camping through one or two of his videos. And I got Tyler. He's half of Chickadee and Honeybee Rustic Works, a team of makers, a couple actually, and they make all kinds of cool stuff in leather and metal and knitting, and they're on Instagram rather than YouTube. But hey, if I can be enough of an ass about it, maybe they'll be on YouTube too one day. And what we're talking about tonight, we're having the what I call the conservation conversation. I figure we're all stuck in our homes, so nobody's, camping or canoeing or doing any really cool bushcrafty stuff. So let's have more of a cerebral conversation. And I come to this through more of an environmentalist perspective. I used to be on several fora or forums with a lot of hunters and shooters and stuff. And these guys very often saw a difference between a conservationist and an environmentalist. A conservationist is like Ducks Unlimited, try to keep the sportsman life alive through conserving areas, and they found that people on my side were more, political pansies, kind of, hugging trees and stuff. I personally don't see a difference between the two. I will proudly call myself both. And this is a conversation I haven't had with any of the guys on here. I really wanted to not pre-discuss this because I want to be surprised, delighted, and maybe pissed off along with everyone else.
A little bit of both.
So, everyone watching right now, or the vast majority of you, are very familiar with these guys, either through their own channels or through mine. So let's say we start. Who wants to go first? Who's got something to say?
Well, first of all, we should define that whole term conservation. Okay, so I'm going to do three things I use. So who defined the term preservation? It was actually John Muir back in the Civil War. He actually did not believe in war, but he believed in the freedom of blacks. But he was a draft dodger. So he escaped from the United States into Canada, and he tripped and fell upon a pack of orchids in Lake Huron. And he wrote in his journal, "Would not the world suffer from the banishment of a single weed?" And he termed preservation. So he defined preservation as every single thing in nature should have equal rights to human beings. Back then, people said, that's a good idea, but we can't live with that. Okay. And we all thought it was a good idea, but we can't live with that. And then Giver Pinchot, later on in the early 1900s, he sort of said, okay, well, we need to conserve the resources, but we still need to exist. And he created a term called conservation. I don't know if you guys know about that, but he created that word in the dictionary, conservation. And it was defined as to protect the most amount of resources for the most amount of people for the longest term possible. So basically, conservation. And everybody goes, well, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. But then those two whole things do not really go well. I mean, it's yin and yang, right? And it was Aldo Leopold, when he was upon the mountain, he graduated through a school of conservation, and his first job was to eradicate wolves on the mountain so they can shoot wolves so hunters could have more deer. And he agreed with that. He went to school for that. And when he went to shoot this one wolf, he saw the green of the eyes of the wolf. And he said, I'm okay with shooting the wolf, but remember, if we shoot the wolf, it has connection to everything. So all of us will hold a rope. And I shoot Pine Martin because he's a terrible fisherman. And I shoot him, and he falls to the ground. We can all feel the tug of the rope. and basically we're all connected. Not to say that we shouldn't shoot pine marten, because maybe some days that's it, I had enough of them, but we all will feel connected to that. And he actually was he was the Moses of the new conservation movement. The whole idea of what we are now looking at today. And the reason why he was the Moses, because he basically died and wrote this book all about his feelings about how we all connected, but he never really saw the promised land. So, woo! I'm having a cup of tea after that. Martin, you're next.
Well, that was a really, really great lesson. Thank you. I didn't know any of those facts about the origins of these terms. That was extremely informative. Thank you. My view of this is sort of conditioned by a completely different thing. It's not political the way environmentalism is, in the way that you were talking about, the way just the way you were describing. A lot of people see environmentalism, nor is it sort of preservation or conservation in the sense of preserving a recreational pastime in the form of angling and hunting and stuff like that. I don't really care about those things. I mean, I care about them, but I mean, they're not what informs my judgments on this. I come at this from the standpoint of evolutionary ecology. I'm interested in sort of in ecosystems and sort of long-term sustainability of ourselves, our species, and how that depends upon the existence of other species. These things are, we're part of an ecosystem, and we belong in nature. We don't belong in cities, which are tribes of millions. That is a completely artificial thing, but we think that's the norm, and that's what we're trying to preserve. And there is, I think, within the environmental movement, a sense that everyone needs to live in a city, and everyone needs to become a vegetarian. People have to stop killing things, except for plants. We should all become, vegetarian. That sort of thing. And if we all lived in cities, then that would sort of free up the land for other organisms. And that is, I think, an inhuman view of humans. It is a view of human beings that has divorced them from the natural world. Mm-hmm. So the reason I like the outdoors is because I think it is where we are most fully human. Our bodies and our brains and our minds, our psychologies, are the results of more than millennia. I mean, literally millions of years of adaptations to problem solving. And that there's an enormous satisfaction in addressing your bodily, material, immediate needs when you're in the natural world. And I think that's why so many people enjoy camping. I mean, to people who don't camp and who don't fish and who don't hunt and who don't hike and who don't backpack, those of us who do are regarded as kind of weird. Like, why in the world would you want to live like a homeless person? Like, why would you buy a bunch of gear to go live like a homeless person in the bush? But I think it's because they're sufficiently estranged from it that they don't appreciate the satisfactions of it. And I mean, among the satisfactions are when you're out there living only with what you have on you and what you can obtain while you're out there and what you can manufacture while you're out there. So bushcraft comes into play. Is enormously satisfying. You are putting your body and your brain to the purposes for which it is evolved and adapted. So I think that it is important for people who are interested in the outdoors, who like camping and bushcraft and angling and hunting and so forth. It's important for those people to understand the kinds of critters that we are. That the world of the natural world is not a playground that we visit occasionally and use for our recreational purposes. It's actually home. It's where we belong, and you can only sort of feel at home there if you understand your place in it. And I think science, and especially evolutionary ecology, is the best way to understand your relationship with the natural world. And this view, I mean, it may sound a little highfalutin, I'm sorry, but I mean, I have found that this way of thinking about myself and this way of thinking about what I enjoy about camping has made my experiences in the wilderness that much more enjoyable. I really feel as if I am coming home when I'm out there. It's not because I'm perfectly at ease in the bush. I'm not. I'm a modern man, a largely sedentary creature living in semi-urban environment. But when I'm out there, I really feel as, okay, this is the kind of creature that I am. This is where I belong. In the same way that a lion belongs on the savannah, we belong in the wilderness. So that's sort of how I view these things. And that is part of my motivation for a certain low-level ecological activism. It's why I support certain kinds of groups. But I've never been interested in sort of conservation or preservation in the sense that Kevin was describing, and those historical origins. Thank you again, Kevin. That was really informative. I had no idea about that.
Guess that makes it my turn, eh?
I think it does.
Yeah, Tyler. No pressure.
Yeah, no. Pine Martin, you kind of hit the nail on the head, but there's a quote from Nesmith you didn't say that I now get to say. We do not go to the green woods and crystal waters to rough it. We go to smooth it. And that's the thing. I come at conservation not just from a point of, I need to have respect for what I was given, but also from the point of conservation is kind of part of human identity. We kind of know to take care of things for our own sake, like Kevin was getting at, but I don't think conservation is so human-centric, because when you want to take care of what you're given and you want to go out to nature to explore your own human identity, you kind of have to conserve it. It's funny how, like, we look at some of the things we do in modern day that are totally anti-conservation. We clear-cut forests, and in Michigan, for example, we destroyed the 200-foot pines that were just everywhere. And at one point, Michigan's forests were essentially non-existent. So I come at conservation not from a very human-centric point of view, but almost from an externally, like, nature-centric point of view. Back to the John Muir idea, where it's, everything in nature, I don't necessarily think it needs equal rights with humans, because, there's obviously the argument it doesn't work. But I think everything in nature does deserve some kind of modicum of respect, more so than we give it, because it is a system and we are all part of that rope. And when you start destroying things, we feel the tug. And I think conservation is a way of trying to reconnect with that tug to start to feel it again.
Yeah.
Well, hold on. Tyler brought up something interesting, because here's something that gets discussed a lot is like animal rights, nature rights. And the only problem I have with a right is that you have to be able to exercise it. Right. So which is why when we're talking about, people not, killing dogs on the street or whatever, I speak more about animal welfare. I speak more about nature conservation, because to me, I have a philosophical problem with the idea of rights. Not that nature and animals don't deserve such things, but it's just, if I have a right, it means that I can choose to exercise it. If I don't exist within the framework of humans exercising things like rights and freedoms and privileges.
Yeah, but so look at the history of that. The first right for animals were the domesticated animals. If I got Tyler's cat, do you own a cat, Tyler?
No, I own dogs, but sure.
Pine Martin, do you own a cat? Yep. Okay. Let's just say cats. Okay. Anybody here own a cat? So,
I have owned cats for most of my life. This is my first time with him.
So let's look at a cat.
I like to look at cats.
Cats and dog lovers, whatever. But a cat actually kills a lot of birds, and basically a cat doesn't do that good towards nature, right? So, but if I actually got your pet Charlie's cat and got the tail and rolled it around and smuck it against the wall and killed it, would anybody be upset? And would I be breaking a law? Yes, I would. It was the Animal Welfare Act created. That was the first law to protect animals. It was for domesticated animals. It wasn't until 1972 when John C. Lilly figured out that a dolphin had the brain capacity of a 2 or 3 year old child. And all of a sudden the government said, hey, no, you can't tell people that, because if that's true, then that means they have the same laws protecting them as a 2nd or 3-year-old child.
Okay.
Don't do that. And don't say that chimpanzees are equal to humans. That'll thing. But at the same time, if there's a spider going across the floor right now, unless it wasn't endangered, if I didn't like it, I'd squish it. Nobody would have a problem with it. So John Muir had a point. He really had a good point. that he said we were equal to all species.
And that I can buy into. My only issue with the whole rights thing is that rights is more of a political kind of thing, in terms of human rights and labor rights. I think I got the term wrong and all that stuff. I think that the protections that are there in law are good and maybe should be a little stronger for the natural world and for animals and stuff, or non-human animals, shall we say.
I have some thoughts on that. I want to echo something you're saying there. So my background is in academic philosophy, and of course the subject of rights is something that gets discussed in philosophical circles all the time, especially in moral philosophy, political philosophy, and so forth. And, now there are certain conceptions of rights that view rights as natural. So people sometimes talk about natural rights or God-given rights or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
But for the most part, when we speak of rights in a secular context, rights are really political objects. They are political conceptions. And so, as you said, you have to affirm a right. You have to be able to exercise a right. Like, so for instance, let me think of the expression, the right to life. There's a lot of people out there who believe that they have a right to life. They believe that an unborn fetus has a right to life, for instance. And you can debate whether or not they do have a political right, but certainly an unborn fetus can't exercise such a right. That some people would say, well, yeah, but an elderly dying person who's in a coma surely has a right to life, and they can't exercise their right to life, right? But the idea is that in principle you should be able to exercise a right, and so part of of what goes hand in hand with the conception of a right is this capacity to exercise it or to not exercise it. For instance, I have the right to drink this tea. That doesn't mean I have to do it. I have a right to do it. I can exercise that. In principle, I can exercise it or not. It's not a right if you have to do it, right? So I mean, an argument that you'll sometimes hear against people who believe in the right to life is to say, well, listen, do you think that the right to life comes from God? Yes. Are you allowed to commit suicide? No, God forbids that. Oh, so you can't exercise the right to not live, right? You can't exercise. You never get to exercise the right. You have to. You have it. Well, you don't. So those people don't actually believe in the right to life. Those people believe in the obligation to life.
They believe in the sanctity of life.
They believe in the sanctity of life. The sanctity of life, but it's more than the sanctity of life. The sanctity of life in that particular, within that particular religious tradition, is one that in essence says you are obligated to live. Right? But I mean, a right is something you can exercise, or you can refrain from exercising it. But if you can't refrain from exercising, it's not a right. And so, so some people would say, well, that's not a right. Now, animals certainly can't exercise their rights one way or another. They do things, but they can't exercise their rights. That is, they cannot conceive of their actions as rights that they are electing to exercise.
I think that's why I twig on it right there. Actually, I think that's what my issue is.
And there's one other piece to this puzzle, and that is that rights are often understood as a complement to obligations. We ordinarily accord somebody rights to the extent that they, in principle, can have obligations. So all humans have rights, but all humans have obligations. No. Children have less rights; they have fewer rights, but they have fewer obligations. People who operate in a diminished capacity due to cognitive deficits have certain rights, but they don't have the full complement of rights because they can't be given the full complement of obligations. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people think it's that way with animals. Animals cannot have obligations, right? They simply do not have the cognitive capacities to enter into obligations in those kinds of contractual relationships, and so they don't have rights. And that's my view. I think that there's no such thing as animal rights. That is a fiction. That is an overgeneralization of the concept of a political artifact, a right, onto the natural world. What I think we have, though, are obligations. I don't have to invoke the concept of a right for an animal to give reasons why it is wrong to be cruel, right? I can be concerned about an animal's welfare simply because it has a capacity to suffer. It doesn't have to have a right to not suffer, right? It just has to be wrong to inflict suffering. So as long as we understand that we have obligations, you don't even have to invoke the dubious concept of rights and apply that concept of rights to animals in the natural world generally. I don't think an ecosystem has a right to exist. right? But I think we have obligations, right? The Mona Lisa, let's say nobody owned the Mona Lisa. I think it would be awful if someone just defaced or destroyed the Mona Lisa. It would be robbing the whole world. But it wouldn't be a violation of someone's property rights if it so happened that nobody owned it. But it's because we have an obligation to our fellow humans, right? So you can have an obligation to beings without them having any rights. You don't have to imagine that if you have obligations to something, it's because it has rights. That, I think, is a mistake. We can have obligations towards animals in the natural world and ecological systems without having to talk about rights. And I think if people in the environmental movement sort of purged that rights-based vocabulary, they would be on firmer ground, I think, than they sometimes are.
And it's funny because you hit on something that is an issue with those of us who don't like to frame it as a rights thing, because in many liberal democracies, especially here in the West, we have this concept that rights are like sacrosanct, right? Rights are this like this foundation, to the point where if you don't use them as the yardstick, you're kind of anti-democratic. And so I find that I keep running into this idea that saying no, it's not a rights thing, somehow gets read as, so you don't think people have rights? I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the conversation is skewed.
Our obligation to protect it does not necessarily rights for them make.
Because they don't have to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obligations don't entail rights. They don't necessitate there being a right. You can talk about animal welfare and concern for animal welfare and concern for the environment, and that can impose all kinds of obligations upon you as a rational agent without ever invoking the dubious doctrine of rights, because rights are political accomplishments. They're political achievements. Right? You have to fight for rights. You have to maintain rights. These things get encoded in laws. And even if you believe in a doctrine of natural rights that sort of come from God or something like that, then you have to posit that there's a being that imposes those rights, just the way our legal system imposes rights, or grants rights, rather. So, God grants rights if he exists, and there are natural rights, or our legal system grants rights to us as a result of our political machinations. But I think it's a mistake to sort of lard the environmental concern and conservationist talk with the vocabulary of rights.
Which, interestingly, by the way, doesn't actually denigrate anything that Kevin was saying. This is just kind of, I realize I sort of started a pedantic kind of conversation, because not couching anything in the terms of rights doesn't mean that what Kevin was saying is actually wrong in any way. It's just a different.
Also, what I was doing is looking at the history. We learn from history, right? I mean, I wasn't rambling on about myself. It's the history shows where those terms came from.
Yeah.
But also, the Endangered Species Act was created in 1972, and that was the first act that actually protected wild species. But the ironic thing about that is it protected species that were dying off. Like, what the hell? So why just protect species that were dying off? Why can you kill the spider going across the floor if it's not endangered, but not the one that's endangered? Because Thoreau basically said many years ago, and people keep forgetting, we are not the top of the pyramid. If we think we're top of the pyramid and we are all control of all the species, like it was, I'm not a religious person. We go back to I'm Roman Catholic, so basically my saint is Saint Francis of Assisi. So he was saint of nature. No, he wasn't. If you go back in time, he was a saint because he gave all the money to the poor. If he was actually made saint of nature back then, he would have died and burned as a warlock. That's the history of that. It's true stuff. So the problem is it's anthropocentric. We think we're the most important. And what's going on now, and I actually told myself never to talk about this tonight, but what's going on now, we are not that important. We are in a thunderstorm going across a big, huge lake right now on a canoe trip, and we are this small right now. And we need to be reminded of that. We are very small. Anthropocentric, we are not the king of the species. We are an ecosystem. We are that rope that if actually Polymartin falls, we feel the tug. Like those people knew what they're talking about back then. We need to hear the history and learn from it, as opposed to just ignore it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's funny because it's easy for us to take that human-centric view because we're the guys with the industries and the money and the militaries and all the things that we think are pinnacle stuff, you know? And that, by the way, God, do I want to get into this? I will just very briefly say that is also the main driver of the whole colonialism thing, right? You have, Europeans arrive with guns and huge ships, and they see natives with canoes. And even if they have cities full of gold, they don't have guns. They don't have like European-looking royalty. They don't have massive ships, so they have to be lower on the ladder. It's sort of,
it's a hierarchical view of living things. It goes back to this idea of the great chain of being. The most real and the most wonderful and splendid thing is God, and then below that you have the angels, and then below that you have humans. But humans themselves are ranked within that chain of being, from the sort of most civilized and advanced to the least civilized and advanced, and the most primitive, and then get down into other animals and so forth. And so, colonialism was very much infected with this notion of a hierarchy, and I mean, at some point in human evolutionary history, we became able to not just master, hunting and tool making and fire making and so forth, but we discovered agriculture, and once we discovered agriculture, this extraordinary thing happened. We didn't have to hunt and fish all the time and gather. We were able to generate surplus. It was the triumph over a marginal existence, and this triumph over marginality made it such that because we had surpluses now, we could have huge populations, right? There wasn't feast and famine anymore every few years or every decade or something like that. And so huge populations bred large populations of people in concentrations, the first city-states and so forth. And humans were forever changed by that, right? So the very concept of civilization, as we think of it, is actually us moving out of a kind of state of nature into a state of artificiality. You lose your way in a way. Like anthropologists have a name for this. They call it the sedentary trap. When a culture moves from a hunter-gatherer based way of life and practicing, bushcraft and what we think as a primitive way of life, and they move into agriculture, they become sedentary. They engage in division of labor. There are people who are dedicated to growing things. There are people who are dedicated to protecting the growing of things. This is where you get the first armies and so forth. You get people dedicated to certain other kinds of crafts. You get a division of labor. You get specialized labor. But ancient humans were not like that. They were all generalists. And it's called a sedentary trap because once a culture moves out of hunter-gathering and sort of primitive bushcraft way of life, they forget the skills. Like in one generation, you forget how to hunt, you forget how to trap, you forget how to fish, you forget how to start a fire by primitive means. You just forget all this. We live in that world. We live in this world where we have forgotten our past. We've literally forgotten who we are.
Well, we've even forgotten how to build houses, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so what happens is there's no going back. That is, it's not easy to go back. But I think that is what sort of explains why we are so estranged from nature, and why some of us who are into this kind of stuff are so motivated to sort of protect the natural world. We sort of find our home in it. I think it's not a coincidence that a huge number of anglers and hunters and campers and hikers and just people who enjoy the outdoors are among the people that are so active in environmentalism. And I am frankly a little bit worried when I talk to people who are strongly motivated to protect nature, but have don't do it. They live in cities and no concept of it. I sort of fear that they're probably not properly motivated, and they're probably going to have the wrong ideas, and are going to recommend really bad courses of action. So that's always my fear.
It's funny because in where my dad lives in the Okanagan, there was this huge kerfuffle because the federal government wanted to put in a national park, and a lot of the local ranchers had these signs up saying "No park, no national park," and it was like the national or provincial. I think it was a national park, because what they were afraid of was this park being fenced off, and their cattle or horses or whatever could no longer sort of wander onto those fields to munch. And I think that it sort of comes into what we're talking about, but from a tertiary road, that as soon as the government wants to change what this land is used for, suddenly we got to get our backs up. There's something about conservation and environmentalism that the two sides of any argument automatically don't want to cooperate and collaborate and get something to work. I think for this national park, just going on what my dad said he thought he heard, is that the government has worked out a deal with the ranchers whereby their animals could go on and still use the grasslands for browsing. But it's like there's something about this entire argument that brings people's inner bitch out. Like if you say I'm this and I say I'm that, it's like we're pre-set up not to say, okay, so in what ways are we the same? Can we build on that? Which I think is a major stumbling block to environmentalism and conservationism. Because at the end of the day, neither of them want the forests ripped out. You know what I'm saying? And so at the end of the day, there's an oil company out there somewhere loving the fact that these two groups of people, if you even acknowledge that they're two different groups, are like at loggerheads all the time.
Yeah. Sorry, Nate, sorry, Tyler. Not me. Tyler, I'll shut up in a second because he should say something. But basically, if you look at it, it's all to do with history again. Like Reverend Thomas Malthusian theory said back in the day that of all the population we're gaining, and what Martin Pine said is like we're creating technology, and we're not going back in time. And then Paul Ehrlich said the same thing. Club of Rome back in the 70s said the same thing. But I interviewed a bunch of hermits in the wilderness. I think I've talked to Lisa to Pine Martin about this, but I talked to all separate interviews. I interviewed him for the Canadian Geographic, and I said, okay, so what's up? Why are you living in the woods? And I asked them what's the new war, and they said it's going to be the war in water. But at the end of every single interview, they said it would be self-interest will be the destruction of us all. But they also said that we can't go back in time. There's no way the human species, and they know themselves because they'll be in the woods and they'll try to live in nature and they'll create something better to make themselves more comfortable. All of them said that. So we can't go back in time and live in primitive people. That's not our culture. So we shouldn't feel bad about that. I mean, we're going to create a cure for the virus. That's a good thing, right? Yeah. So we can't go off and all of us live in the bush and whatever. So that, I don't know. It's a catch-22, right? So I don't think we can go back in time. I think it's great that we feel good about being back in time and reconnecting with nature, because if we don't know that, we'll all, live miserable. Imagine living a life and not being connected with nature. It'd be miserable.
You know what? If I'm not in nature semi-regularly, I become an asshole. So the idea of not having the nature around ever, put the 45 in my mouth now. I wouldn't be able to handle it. Two things I want to say. One, I'm looking at the side chat, and I would like to sort of acknowledge a few things. Nate Muskoka is keeping a pretty lively commentary going. I just put one of his up on screen.
That Ontario, he's always keeping us in trouble.
Yeah, I know. I know all about that guy now. But I also why is it that we see getting back to nature as going back in time? Why can't that be the future? Why can't that be a modern pastime. I mean, to us, it's a modern pastime because we're here in 2020, and if we're ever allowed out of our houses again, we're going to hit the
billions
woods.
of people on the earth. Like, what are you talking about? That can't happen. Billions and billions of people being bushcrafters in the wilderness? Are you freaking crazy?
No. I'm not saying why can't the entire population do it. No, because I don't want the entire population crowding up my forest. But what I'm saying is, why can't it be considered? Look, if you're me, you like old school tools, right? You like wood and metal and all that, and so there's a certain historicity to my interest.
Yeah.
But I don't hit the woods. Okay, I use flint and steel because I like the timelessness of it. The it's not even timelessness, the ancient aspect of it, right? I like to I get the fizz from feeling, millennia behind snap. I've just lit a piece of charred cloth or charred amadou or something, but I don't hit the woods because I feel like I'm Cro-Magnon or a Neanderthal. I hit the woods because, well, partially because it calms the demons in my head, but also because I just love the smells and the feels and the looks. It's not a historical thing for me. But in so many of these conversations, as soon as you say, I mean, even, Kevin, you understand exactly what I'm talking about because it's framed that way for us, right? We can't go back in time. I'm like, I don't want to go back in time. I don't want to die of cholera or tuberculosis. I'm okay with being a modern guy. And I think that being, well, postmodern technically. And I think that there is room in the postmodern world for decompressing for a week in the woods with some old school tools.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know that it's going back in time either. I really don't think it is going back in time. If I had to say, like, put my mark on why we all do the bushcraft thing, it's like we talked about earlier. It's a reconnecting with like personal identity. It's really hard for at least me, and I know at least the four of us on the screen, it's very difficult for us to feel fully human without ever actually making it into the woods. It's not friggin' possible. And so to make sure that we can keep doing that, we have to turn to conservation. And I think conservation is an extension of that diligence where we say, I need to feel human again ere I go into the woods. The other thing is I need to go into the woods ere I need to be a conservationist or environmentalist or what other semantic term you have for it. So I don't think it's so much going back in time as it is reconnecting because one, yes, we really do fear forgetting those skills across the generations. Yeah. And feverishly trying to keep them alive is exciting and wonderful and helps us smooth it a little bit. But the other thing is the whole hand to mouth thing for humans is natural. It's really hard to explain that to somebody because we live in a modern world where that's not the culture. But here's the deal. When you don't live hand to mouth, it really does kind of crush your soul because you go in and day out and you feel no connection between what you are doing every single day and you staying alive. Like going to an office job and slaving away, in one sense, yes, it's fulfilling, sure. But in another sense, it's soul crushing because you're not connected between being alive and doing what you're doing. I say this all the time, and it gets back to conservation and living under natural skills. I think if you're somebody who eats meat, you have to do one of two things. Or one. Let's count in order. Why not?
Yeah.
The first one is I don't know that you have to kill the animal, but you have to be there for it. And two, you either need to be processing it or be part of the processing. You would not believe the number of people who are utterly disconnected with that portion of being a living, functioning person in this whole ecosystem that we exist in. Like, why would I kill a cow when I can go to the grocery store and get beef? Like, there are people who think that way.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you in many ways. I mean, I've skinned several deer in my time. I'm a little more squeamish about the gutting, but I've done it. But I also, because in my gut, I feel the way you do. I think that if I'm going to eat meat, I had to understand that it doesn't come from plastic wrap. But I also don't want the entire population trying to hunt, because it's hard to hunt when you're a minority. And the entire reason I got into hunting was because I had guilt over factory farming. There are ways to not play into the factory farming, the gestalt of it, without buying a gun and going into the woods. I'm like some of you guys here, probably all of you guys here, that I don't think that humans are separate from animals. I think we're human animals. And so I like the connection to my food that comes from that. But it's like I'm of two minds of this, because part of me says, man, if you're going to eat meat, you got to know where it came from. But part of me is like, well, but then if everyone knew where it came from, the way Tyler, you do, and I do, there'd be no animals left. Well, I live in a province where your bag limit for a deer is 1, right? Now, Montreal is what, 3 million people, give or take. Quebec is 8 million people, give or take. Imagine every family had to hunt for its year of meat. I'd never get a deer.
I don't believe everyone has to hunt their meals constantly, but what I do believe is, like I said, you have to at least understand or be part of it at least once. I mean, you can't realistically think of yourself as a conscious. No, actually, let's start there. Nate Muskoka. Does conservation of land and wildlife always have to include with the harvesting of wildlife on that land? No, it does not. Nate,
I'm so glad you're here.
Why isn't he on the stream?
Ah, man, he's got to be on the stream. You know what? Whatever I'm doing next month, you're invited, Nate.
But yeah, I don't think you can realistically call yourself, honestly, not intellectually lazy if you don't understand those connections. So no, I don't think you have to hunt all the time for it, but you have to at least build those neural pathways once between, eating meat means taking life, and I have to have respect for that. And that's where my idea of respecting conservation comes from. The only reason I am alive is because the rest of nature exists to make me that way. And you can't, like, you don't exist without the rest of nature, or you don't exist without responsible use of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? Everything exists because everything else is part of the machine. Everything that dies feeds something else with its death. And everything that lives will eventually feed something else.
Well, everything that lives feeds off of the death of something else. I mean, even if you can be the most strident vegan, gardening in your backyard, you will know that all kinds of organisms have to die back there for your plants to live, right? I mean, there's mineral content, right? Like bone meal, for instance, or blood meal that people put in their soil. Where's that coming from? That's coming from animals.
Yeah.
And that's because in the natural world, plants grow off of the carcasses of dead animals, right? Those minerals are returned to the soil. There's no such thing as eating such that nothing has, no sentient being has died for that meal. I think the mistake is people are very narrowly focused as what's on their plate. Is there a dead living animal on my plate? No, there isn't. Right? But did animals have to die in order for there to be this kale and Brussels sprouts on my plate? Yes, as a matter of fact, they did. And if you don't know that, it's because you don't know enough about ecology. Mm-hmm. People who are into deep ecology, a lot of these people who are very strident activists who think that we shouldn't even kill parasites and viruses and things like that. They at least understand these deep connections. With respect to practices like factory farming and stuff like that I think we are all right to be ashamed of, that is a function of not understanding and not being acquainted with where our food comes from, that it requires animals. When you are alienated and estranged from the animals that give you life, that feed you, you can hold them in contempt and slight or no regard whatsoever, and you can be content, and to eat your eggs and you don't care that it came from this battery farm of a million hands crammed in together in absolute misery. You can do that with complete insouciance, but you can't do that when you know where your food comes from and you have a relationship to the living organisms. A lot of people like the idea of hunting. They go out there, and the first time they kill an animal, they feel tremendous remorse, right? I know the first time I ever hunted, it bothered me. I mean, I think hunting is okay. I think there are ethical ways and humane ways of trapping. I fish. I don't eat fish. I'm allergic to fish. Yes, Kevin, we have to have a talk about you. You teased me about my anger. So when my wife and I go fishing, for instance, and this is getting into some practice. This segue into some practical considerations. When my wife and I go fishing on a camping trip, or when we just go fishing because she wants to eat fish, because she's not allergic to it, won't kill her to eat it. This is our practice. We fish until we have caught the meal that we want, and that's it. We do not practice catch and release in the sense of catch a fish, throw it back, catch a fish, throw it back, or keep a bunch on a stringer or something like that, and then pick the best one. No, that is sort of, as I see it, that is inflicting an awful lot of pain for the purposes of sheer recreation. These are living, feeling animals. They suffer, they feel fear, and they feel pain. So I don't ever just catch and release for recreational purposes. I will catch and I will release a fish if it is too small, it's the wrong species, or an out of season, for instance. But if that animal that we catch is a keeper, if I catch it on the first cast, and that happens, we've gone fishing, we've gone on day trips, we're going to go fishing, you get in the canoe and go fishing, and on the first cast, boom, you reel in a nice big fat bass, and you go, great, well, that's it, that's dinner for my wife tonight, that's what we said we wanted. The rods get put away. And I dispatch the fish immediately. I always carry a priest, a little wooden club, and I administer the last rites, and it's done. And we clean it as soon as we can, or put it in a cooler pack in the canoe, and that's it. That's how we fish. We don't sort of practice catch and release. And so catch and release is often seen by a lot of people as a very ethical and humane way to do it. And I agree that sort of flattening the barbs on your hooks and so forth is a good practice. I do that. I remove the barbs on my hooks so that I can release the fish, so that if it's not a keeper, I can release it without just ripping its throat out and carving up its mouth, which will lead to infections and cause it to die. So there's all kinds of ways, I think, of harvesting food very, very ethically and humanely. But there's a lot of anglers out there that I think are really not practicing the most humane way of fishing, right? I see people just tossing fish, literally tossing them like it's a beer can or a pack of cigarettes, just tossing it back into the water, splash, right? As opposed to wetting your hands before you handle the fish, so as not to ruin the slime covering and descale it and stuff like that, and try to remove the hook while the fish is in the water if you can. It's not always possible. A lot of people won't even carry a pair of pliers to help disgorge a hook. They'll just sort of rip on the fish, and then throw it back in. So things like that. And I think it is easier to sort of be cruel to animals very casually this way if you're not interacting with them, if you don't see them as living animals that can feel and can suffer. They don't have to have rights for you to have obligations, as we said at the outset. And I think that the more people fish and the more people hunt, I think they get that. It's possible to get hardened and not care. But I think most people, when they go out and they hunt and they fish for the first time, they feel squeamish. They feel a little pang of conscience. And that, I think, is something that has to be cultivated in people. But you can't cultivate it if your only experience of eating fish is going to the fish department in your grocery store.
First of all, I'm going to let I keep getting Tyler speak because he's got to speak, and Kevin speak because he's also been pretty silent. But I do want to say, Martin, if we ever get to go on that canoe trip, because I don't know, my province is shut down until God knows when, and school's out.
Mine, so who knows?
Our trip may have to go later, but I'm glad to hear that you're allergic to fish, because I'm allergic to any of the pink fleshed fish. So I was kind of worried about you suddenly slapping a salmon down in front of me one night or something, and me being like, I'm gonna die if I eat this.
I'm not gonna catch any salmon around here, so don't worry about it.
Okay.
Maybe some bass or pike, if you're allowed to eat those. We can.
I can eat the white ones. It's just anything that's what they call a poisson gras.
Yeah.
Is that like a fatty fish, an oily fish,
Yeah,
whatever it's
yeah,
called?
yeah.
Those will do me in. I had a trip to the hospital due to one of those, and tests came back that I can't eat anything that's a red fleshed fish.
Yeah, I can't eat any fish.
Oof.
I can eat other seafoods, but I go into anaphylactic shock if I have any kind of fish. So
Yep.
yeah,
That's
it
rough.
sucks being a backcountry canoe tripper and you can't eat your own catch.
Oh,
Man, it
listen,
sucks.
dude. I grew up half in Vancouver, okay? Being there and being allergic to salmon, nightmare. Because, oh, David, your kids are here from Montreal. We're going to show them a West Coast delicacy. Okay, you know? But you've said a lot of really interesting things. Also, Nate said something that he's got a question down there that I've left up because it's something I've been thinking about a lot over the past few years. And I've got an anecdote because I think we should really shift into more practical stuff at this point. We've been.
May I interrupt with sorry, could I interrupt you with one point? It's a direct answer to Nate's question.
Yeah.
His question is, okay, so is there a way out of sight, out of mind industrial farming that gives protein to the masses and includes conservation? Yeah, there is, Nate. Look up Allen Savory or the Allen Savory Institute, or just go on YouTube or Google a TED Talk by someone named Allen Savory. Savory like the word savory.
Is that spelled the international way or the American way?
The American way with an no U. So just look up Allen Savory or How to Fight Desertification as a TED Talk. There is I think a very, very sober and well-established path there that would make it possible for us to have sustainable animal products.
I've watched
that is
this
not
TED
vicious.
Talk.
Yeah.
I was about to say he stole my answer. That's what I was going to feed Nate.
I just looked it up, and yeah, I've seen that TED Talk. That was brilliant.
All right. Okay, so practical conservation. One of the things I think conservation is diligence, doing your due diligence. Pine Martin, you kind of hit it right in the head with the whole fishing thing, because a lot of people think they're doing one ethical thing or one sustainable thing, and they're very much not. And that's I find that not necessarily entertaining in a way, but I guess grossly fascinating. Let's just go with that. In the same sort of way that we sometimes pass a car crash and can't stop ourselves from, kind of rubbernecking at it, is how I pass some of the practices of what is quote unquote ethical, like bushcrafting for conservation. For example, and we brought this up before we ever got on together, people who go to the bathroom in the woods. There is a right way and a wrong way to do that. All right, so let me tell you the wrong way first. The wrong way is
before you say this, whatever you say, Kevin Callan probably has like the encyclopedic answer.
I guarantee it.
I pooped in the woods more than you guys could ever imagine.
What a quote. I'll have to write that down somewhere on a mug for him.
I'm older than all of you, I think, so therefore I poop more.
Howdy, Dauber.
Hey,
so,
Dauber.
So the wrong way to do it is to not dig your hole, depending on where you are. There are places where it's wrong to dig a hole, but most of the time it's the right thing to dig a hole.
I didn't even know there was anywhere where it was wrong to dig a hole.
There are a lot of species that start degenerating and get easily infected in the ground once you dig them up. A lot of mosses and flower beds and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
So in those places, like, don't dig a hole there, go somewhere else. But the thing is, they have these quote unquote biodegradable wipes that they're like barely able to say are biodegradable because they're like made out of nylon and mostly cotton. And the problem is, then you leave this small amount of nylon webbing on the ground.
Yeah.
If everybody does that, it's almost like a weed mat. Nothing grows through it. And the worst part is they don't want to do that because they hear what I just said, and then they throw it in the fire.
Yeah.
And it's like, at that point, like, why do you even go?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then there's the right way to do things, which is actually have things that are either okay to burn or okay to bury. So 100% natural fiber wipes. Yes, they're super annoying. And I know it sounds stupid to buy like cotton toilet paper or something like that. I'm not saying that's what I would do, but I have my other ways. I actually think pine marten, I think you talked about this once. The best way to do it is actually to go to the bathroom somewhere and wash yourself. Like, dang bloody nabbit. It's what we've done for many, many, many millennia.
Yeah.
It is okay to go to the bathroom and wash yourself in the woods. But little practices like that, where I think practical skills really do have to be thought through, because there's a lot of people that want to be in the woods.
That's a good point.
Well, I think that's a really good point. There's a lot of people, and sorry, but if you're going to tell 800,000 people in Algonquin Park to wash their butt with a water bottle, that's not going to happen, man. I agree.
Sure.
I agree with actually Pine Marten with the whole idea of fishing only when you're going to catch fish. We are not going to get the masses to do that. It's called sheep, okay?
Sheep.
So we need to actually control the sheep herd and not make them all of us. If they're all of us, that's not going to happen. They're not going to go in the woods anymore. I'm going to be the activist right now. They're not going to go in the woods anymore. If you go to tell the general public on a CBC radio interview tomorrow morning, and I'm going to talk to 300,000 people, I'm going to tell them to wash their butt with a squeeze bottle, Pine Marten squeeze bottle. Like, you're not going to do that.
I have never advocated that. I have never advocated that. I think.
Oh, sorry.
I think someone. I'm being confused with someone else. I have some videos on how to poop in the woods. But
Sorry.
The portable bidet is not an invention of mine or a recommendation of mine.
I got it right here. It's called the Pine Marten bidet. You got it right here.
No.
I'll bring it up.
You're a damn liar. You're a damn liar.
Look right here. I used it tonight because of the pandemic.
Why would you say that on a live stream?
This is getting so weird.
Are we live? Are we live?
Suddenly my viewership goes, choo.
That was pre-tape.
Great. We've already degenerated into the lowest common denominator of human
We're not
existence.
even an hour.
I know. But the thing is, you're right about the TP mounds, and we're all sick and tired of it going to areas that are overused, and people don't know what to do. And you're right about whether you build a pit. I mean, I would never build a pit unless I had like 30 students with me. Then I'd say, okay, that would be proper. If I'm by myself or with a small group, which it should be, that's the ethical thing. I would do the cat scratch. I would actually, maybe if it's a really well-used area and everybody's comfortable with themselves, I'd go back and I would burn the toilet paper in the fire. I would burn it in winter camp. I'd burn it right there, but I wouldn't burn that in the spring or summer because you're going to put the forest on fire. Yeah. But you can't tell thousands of people to wipe their butt with a squeeze bottle named Pine Marten.
Is there actually a Pine Marten squeeze bottle?
There is. That's how I'm going to make my million.
That's a lie. I actually think the portable bidet is not a bad idea, but it's nothing I've ever used, so it's nothing I've ever recommended to anybody, because I'm not going to recommend a practice that I have not actually used myself. So I when it comes to pooping in the woods, what I always recommend is, unless there's a thunder box, right, or some kind of latrine that's already set up. If that's set up, use that. And what happens is people don't want to sit on a box that's full of poo and there's flies. They're grossed out by it, so they'll poo 5 feet away from there, and then they'll take their wipings, the white toilet paper, and they'll leave that on the ground. They won't even bury it, or they'll bury it so shallowly, just a little bit of duff over top of it that some animal turns it up. And then the next person that goes there's all these what are called white roses, all these sodden, hardened clumps of wet soiled toilet paper all over at the campsite, which is disgusting. And then animals, move them around. You can find them all over the place.
At that point,
yeah, and then you got this really grossly contaminated site, and it's extremely off-putting. So what I always recommend is, I actually have a video on this. It's called the cheek spreader latrine.
What? What?
Yeah, it's called the cheek spreader latrine. It's a very, very simple. Yeah. You
have really.
I have a video on how to poop in the woods. It's called the cheek spreader latrine. It's
oh my God, man! Do you have is it detailed?
You need to link this.
It's extremely detailed. I sort of demonstrate it.
Oh God!
And it's gotten a ton of views. Actually, it's actually a really popular video.
And it's gonna get another one tonight.
So at least a few more people are gonna watch it tonight. But no, look, I'll sort of explain how it works. What you do is you build basically a travois. You take two pieces of wood about 5 feet tall, and a shorter piece of wood and you make them into a triangle. You use shock cord or paracord or something to tie them together. And you lean that up on a rock or on a ledge or a fallen log or something like that. And you end up sitting on this travois, and it kind of spreads your cheeks apart. And so you're resting on your thighs. So you're sitting very comfortably like on a toilet. There's no balancing act. You're not squatting. You don't have to worry about peeing or pooping into your pants or anything like that. It's extremely comfortable. And so what you do is you just dig a tiny little cat hole and you sit down on this thing, you poop in it, and then you cover it up. And whenever possible, I will use some kind of ferns or something like that to wipe myself with rather than toilet paper, because that will degrade naturally. And I don't bury things too deep, because the deeper you bury things, the longer it takes things to degrade anyway. And you got to make sure that wherever you're pooping, it's far enough from water, not close to the lake shore, not close to the river bank or something like that, where that will drain in and contaminate the water for the next person that might be camping, including yourself. So you have to make sure you're far enough. Maybe 50 meters might be a little excessive, but you have to think about how things drain. But far enough from the shore that you're not going to contaminate your own water supply.
So if you're on like even a mild incline and you're camping here, you dig this thing here.
Yeah. Well, you're not worried about it running into your tent or anything like that. You're not going to poop that close to you. What you're worried about is that over time, after like one big rain, there'll be fecal matter and E. coli will just ground runoff. I mean, when you think about it, there's E. coli and fecal matter in all of our lakes and rivers constantly, because all the animals are crapping in the woods and all of the fish are crapping in the water. I mean, that stuff is brimming with that stuff, but it's a matter of concentration, right? But if you are camping, for a weekend with a few friends on a campsite, there's going to be a fair concentration of fecal matter that's going to run off into the place where you're drawing water for drinking and bathing and doing your dishes and washing yourself and all that stuff. So obviously you want to be far enough removed from your principal water sources where that's not going to happen. Anyway, the cheek spreader latrine is just a comfy way to have a poop in the woods without any balancing act or squatting. A lot of people can't squat. Like a lot of us are too heavy. Some people are out of shape, or they get joint pain. They're just not comfortable. Sometimes it takes a long time. A lot of people get bunged up when they go camping. It just takes them days to get around to pooping. And Kevin, you know about this. You've taken young people out. They get bunged up. But so if you can sit comfortably, you can relax and let it happen, right? Whereas if you are sort of, I got an urge and you go, but you're in a really awkward position and you're kind of tensed up, it might not happen. And I know it's happened to me. It's happened to my wife. It's happened to other people we camped with, where we just didn't have a comfortable latrine situation because there wasn't a thunderbox, and it was kind of hard to go comfortably. And that's kind of important. So where you locate it, and the nice thing about this contraption is that you're not cutting down, big trees or anything like that. You're not fashioning anything. You're not bringing in dimensional lumber. It's just basically three pieces of wood that you lash together, and then you can take them apart. And you can move it wherever you want, and you can position it any way you like so that it's comfortable for a bigger person or a small child or whatever.
Well, he's next. I got to go poop.
I said let's get more practical. This is not exactly what I had in mind.
I thought you had a good point.
There's nothing more practical than pooping in the woods. It doesn't get more practical.
So here's the thing: you talked about the whole white rose issue. White rose, but so you have one site that gets used a lot, and it is concentrated, and people don't like it for that reason. And then you get this cycle of, I'll just go 5 feet from there, so it's close, and then the next person. You get the 5 foot cycle basically, and I think that's part of the issue with conservation. Is a lot of times people who are maybe not as well versed or are lying to themselves about how they feel about conservation will want the experience of quote unquote virgin ground every single time they go into nature. And that's a problem, because even as humans, we weren't that way. Not really. We haven't been hunter-gatherers for a long time now.
Damn it.
And telling yourself that you deserve the experience of virgin natural ground every single time you go into nature is, one, absolutely ridiculous because it doesn't exist anymore, and two, absolutely selfish Because even if you find pristine nature that has somehow regenerated to a mostly natural state, you shouldn't be the one to ruin it. You don't go in there and take it for yourself. You leave it there. And that's kind of the point. I can't remember where this was, but somewhere in the Eurasian area of the world, there was a rainforest that had been newly accessed, and someone who was in government basically made the point that, great, we found a rainforest, now don't touch it. And that's kind of the point to be made with conservation is, at least I feel that whenever I'm going into the woods and I find something that looks pretty much untouched, I should mostly be limited to taking pictures of it. You know, even our walking through an area as a group has an impact.
Yeah, well, look at this question that Nate Muskoka's I put up on the bottom of the screen, because you're sort of getting real close to what he's asking.
And I have notes for it.
Do you?
I do have. I specifically. So what I actually wrote down was conservation is far more effective when you're not aiming to conserve, but you're aiming to increase or improve. And that's the deal. You don't conserve things if you're just trying to keep them there, because then every little failure ends up chipping away more and more. Conservation, almost as a mandate, has to be an effort to increase what's there or improve it. Otherwise, the whole leave no trace thing, it's fantastic. It's a great ethos to have, but it can't just be leave no trace. It has to be complemented by you improving what you came to.
Yeah, I mean, so being the not the reverse of what you're saying, but being the more practical person, I'm going to tell you what I've done for all my life. I'm 56 years old. I've been tripping in the woods since I'm 8 years old.
56?
Oh, go to hell.
Come on, I thought we were like the same age. I'm a 47.
What? You're 47?
You are not 10 years older than
Now
me.
you go to hell.
I was.
Continue. Just continue.
All right.
Why I oughta.
So here's the thing. You think about, when you go into the woods, you think about others at the campsite that are going to be there after you, and you think of nature that's going to be there forever. Okay? Two things. When you go to poop. When you go to a campsite and there's a thunderbox, outhouse, boombox, whatever, no, he's not here.
He's here.
You just control yourself, mister. I'm not done yet. All right. So, so basically, oh, you got me out of thought. So anyway, you basically use a thunderbox. If it's there, if it's over full, I'm not using it. Okay. Here's the kicker. Then you go way back in the woods, and it's your morning thing, or your evening thing, or your noonday thing. You go way back in the woods, and you're not afraid to go in the woods. People are afraid to go in the woods. They really think if they go beyond the campsite, they'll be killed by a bear instantaneously. If you go 50 to 60 meters back, find your spot, scratch. If there's no outhouse, then you do that. Then everything will be fine, and nobody's going to find my poop. I swear to God, nobody's ever going to find where I poop. That's my thing. But we're blessed to be in this province where we can do that. You can go to other countries. For example, you go to the United States, going down the Colorado River or the Green River, where you actually carry your poop out in a bag, because it's just population basis. We talked about the Malthusian theory thing. It's just too many people pooping, right? Mm-hmm. So, well, speaking of people that poop too much, Nathan, go ahead. You're full of it, man. You're absolutely full of it.
I'll be right back.
This is getting so awkward.
I teased.
So I just had I had a conversation with a colleague that had just spent a month rafting the Grand Canyon, and yeah, they literally have to cart or put their poop in a bag as they go, like you scoop up after your dog, and pack it all with you for a month.
Whoa.
That'd be a lot of poop for me. I poop a lot.
Okay. Yeah, special containers. Some people use ammo cans, ammo canisters and stuff like that. Yeah.
So apparently where it gets really awkward is because everybody learns each other's pooping habits, is when suddenly a member of the group that should be following along with everybody else's patterns stops.
Oh, this is wow.
This has become a very earthy conversation.
But the thing is, it still fits into, because what we're talking about is, if you're in, look, we have what, a tenth of the population in the United States, right? So we don't have some of the issues that would be like, because look, the Grand Canyon is very popular. If you have everyone just leaving their crap everywhere, digging little holes, forget about it. You're going to essentially poison the entire state. So I mean, I can see why you have to pack it out, just as a means of not turning the, a national monument or whatever they call them into a toxic wasteland. But it's the kind of thing that we don't tend to think about. I have never thought about having to pack out my crap.
Yeah.
I've camped in the desert. I've camped in the Painted Desert in Arizona, in Petrified Forest National Park, for instance. The ground there is like concrete. It's except immediately following a rain. There's no way, even with a steel shovel, you're going to break that ground and dig more than an inch in. I mean, it is literally impossible to pound stakes in the ground, hold down your tent. Like, you have to tie your tent down with big rocks, chunks of petrified wood. So, you're not burying your poop there. It's just out of the question. So what are you doing with it? You're either packing it out or you're just leaving it behind. And depending on where you are, the practice is pack it out. And in other places, it's no, just leave it behind. The desert will reclaim it. It'll dry out in no time. And then it'll just kind of get blown away when it's completely arid.
It's all in your habitat too. I mean, when I was out west, we pooped in the ocean.
Okay.
And we were told to. I didn't do it because I thought it was a really cool idea. Because the tides come in, right? So basically, you got a bidet. So you basically go towards a wave and woohoo, and you're done.
I have negative opinions of the saltwater bidet.
Yeah, I would technically feel weird about that.
Well, I did too. Sorry. And I don't know if that's proper or not, but that's what we were told before we went on the hike. So.
All right, as much as I love talking about poop for an hour at a time, let's move on to something else.
All right.
Yeah, let's talk about pee now.
So actually, could I say just something very quick about the leave no trace ethic? I always view the leave no trace ethic not as something that you can actually realize, but as something that is an ideal towards which you strive. I've done videos sort of telling people, encouraging people to visit and explore Crown land, and I had videos that are instructional in nature, explaining best practices on how to create a Crown land bush site. And that's a site where there isn't already a site, and you need to camp, and there's no place to camp. And so you have to create a site. And how do you create a site without overly impacting the land? I mean, and here I think we just sort of have to revert to the ways of that humans used to do, which is you just have to make a site. Sometimes you have to clear a place to sleep. You have to clear a place where you're going to have a fire. You might have to clear some brush where you're going to string a tarp or something like that.
Yeah.
Now, that's not leave no trace. There's no way to practice leave no trace except in a place where all the traces have been left for you. So leave no trace has no place when you're really out in the backcountry in sort of a virgin area. That's impossible. It's simply walking. So, I mean, in this video, I talk about how, listen, once we arrive at an area where we're going to camp and we decide the tent's going to go here, the tarp's going to go there, our latrine's going to be there, we're going to hang our food there, we'll build our fire there. We decide where are we going to walk so that we're not tramping down too much vegetation all over the place. Because two people in a long weekend can just completely trample a lot of sensitive vegetation, and it will look tramped down for weeks, months, possibly years, depending on the nature of the vegetation, especially if it's mosses. So there's a lot of things that you can do, but leave no trace in this context is merely an ideal towards which you strive. It's not something that you can actualize. But I've had conversations that became fairly heated with people who are strident advocates of strict leave no trace, but that's because they're used to camping along established trails, established routes where there's an established campsite. And there you can practice leave no trace because the traces have all been done. right? You're not impacting the area any further. It's maximally impacted for this kind of recreational usage. But in the backcountry, it can only be an ideal.
Right.
Again, I think this sort of goes back to. Yeah, go ahead.
So this leads me to my next question. I mean, so is the better practice of conservation to go to areas in which conservation has already been practiced and there are established sites, or is that in the wilderness, such as Crown Land and other areas, where you're trying to practice to leave as little
Yeah, I think you can't aim for the leave no trace ideal until you have done some camping on established routes and those heavily impacted areas where you learn those best practices. And then you sort of graduate to Crown Land camping. Unless someone sort of leads you by the hand, you're not going to intuit what you need to do, and you're going to make all kinds of mistakes. You're going to beat the hell out of that ground out of sheer ignorance, not out of deliberate negligence or insouciance. So my recommendation is, practice to leave no trace and start learning camping by going car camping, going backpacking along established trails, camp only on the sites, follow the rules extremely strictly. Don't pick any berries along the way. That is not for you, they're for the animals and so forth. Mm-hmm. And then once you've sort of imbibed that, then I think you can sort of graduate to camping on Crown Land, unless you have someone who's going to shepherd you through that process, and you won't have to have this learning curve where you make all these mistakes and look back with regret and go, oh crap, I kind of destroyed that nice virgin area. Mm-hmm. It looks like hell now,
Yeah.
So that's
not unlike the tool conversation we had forever ago. Pine Martin, you're talking about graduating, and that's exactly what I think it kind of is those areas are, it's not that we can't use them as, quote unquote, advanced bush people or campers or what have you. But it's the whole concept of, you don't know if you necessarily want a tool yet. So you buy the cheap version to figure out if you can make it work in your tool set. And once you figure out that you like said tool and you figure out how to use it properly, then you graduate onto the expensive version of the tool, because you're done like screwing up on the Harbor Freight version or whatever have you in Canada.
Canadian Tire.
Yeah, sure. The cheapest shelf at Canadian Tire.
Yeah.
And that's how I think it should be with camping. Ideally, Nate, most of us, if we truly were entirely dedicated to leaving absolutely no trace, we probably would tread only trodden ground. But it also comes with the caveat, I'm willing to accept traces that are naturally responsible. There is a difference between a naturally irresponsible trace and something that is naturally responsible that, will go down to nothing in a couple of days or a couple of weeks, but long-term and short-term won't harm the area that you're in.
Yeah, I look at it as the trout streams. My dad taught me how to fish when I was a kid, and we knew trout streams, and trout are trout and bass are bass, right? It's not easy to catch a trout, and you have to work really hard to find a good trout stream. So here's a guy that writes guidebooks and tells everybody where to go canoeing, right? But I'm not going to tell you where my trout hole is. I worked really hard all my life to find that one hole, and you have to work that hard to find that hole too. So it's where, right? So my rule is, when I started writing guidebooks, those were canoe routes that were obtainable, that were already developed as canoe routes. They were not new canoe routes. Even the Lost Canoe book that I did were routes that were done but weren't maintained anymore, and that's a different political thing, right? But what's going on now, and you guys will find this really interesting with my life right now, it's really cool. I actually could not do my speaking tour. I was on a 3-month tour speaking all over North America and the UK on a new book on Paddler's Guide to Algonquin, and telling everybody where to go. And, like everybody lost their job, whatever, and it's okay, you got to rethink. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to put this online, and I'm going to show everybody where to go canoeing in Algonquin. People loved it. It was great. It was a great alternative, right? But then I had all these people that night saying, oh my God, it'd be so great for you to do a thing on where to go canoeing on Crown Land, because the parks are going to be closed, and they are. And now national parks are closed as well, so that's a new thing. So I said, hey, that's not a bad idea. And Christine, my partner, said, Kevin, really think about that. That's against your rule. because you're going to tell thousands and thousands and thousands of people to go to Crown Land where they're all supposed to stay at home right now, right? And I went, yeah, you're right. So I didn't. And here's the thing. It's like trout pond. Do I tell everybody the trout hole or not right now? And no, you know what? I'm not. I mean, I'll tell people where to go on managed parks or routes that are in existence right now. But I'm not going to tell them my secret trout pond. Not because I'm self-interest, because I don't believe that. I think that would be the demise of the world, right? But at the same time, is that right now, if you tell all these people that are all inside wanting to get out and they can't, and I tell them, oh, here's a bunch of Crown Land places. Oh, but by the way, Pardon Martin knows a bunch of places, and he'll tell you go to his house and visit him. It'd be Andrew. It'd be Andrew. Pooping everywhere. Poop everywhere.
Nice to see you bringing the full circle there, Kevin.
Yeah, I've been to Pardon Martin's house, and it's true that he has bidets and fancy holes all around his property.
You're all terrible liars.
Is everyone complete with its own pressurized Pine Martin squeeze bottle?
These are vile calumnies. You'll all pay dearly for this.
I actually wanted to ask Martin a little bit about that, because I'm wondering if he has seen a surge in activity on his channel, specifically in the Crown Land videos in the last 7 days.
I don't monitor my YouTube channel very carefully. Like my channel's not monetized. I don't make any money off any videos. I've never monetized any of my content. So I don't actually track that. So it's possible. And actually, I want to cop to something here. So when people were being told, hey, you need to stay home and stuff like that, self-isolate. Well, we weren't being told to stay home, but we were being instructed to maintain social distance. And then we heard that, provincial parks in Ontario are all going to be closed until April 30th. And people were saying, where can we camp? And I said, well, there's always Crown Land. And my feeling about that is, that was maybe not the best recommendation. Sort of my escape hatch here from culpability is that I don't ever tell people where to go. On my channel, I have tools on how to find Crown Land. I never tell people, I don't give locations out specifically. And I have been criticized for that, but there's a reason why I don't do it. And my feeling is this: if someone wants to find Crown Land and is willing to watch my videos and go to the online Crown Land Policy Atlas and do the work of finding their own and doing some reconnaissance and finding out where there's a place to park, if there's an access road and so forth. If they're willing to do that work, when they find it, they're going to feel like they've earned it, and they will value it and they will prize it. If you just give it to people, if it's too easy, if it's like the trout hole that Kevin's talking about, and you just tell them where to go, they're going to fish it out right away. So I don't give out any specific location. So that's sort of my concern with that. But I'm not aware of any bump in views. I have not looked. I noticed I got more subscribers recently. I know that Nate, you recommended my channel to some people on Instagram, along with a bunch of really good channels. In fact, I felt like I was in really good company in those recommendations. So thank you for that. But I noticed an increase in subs. I didn't notice where the specific traffic was.
What if I give you a really good bottle of whiskey, Martin? Would that make a difference?
And you don't need me, Kevin, to find Crown Land. You of all people. I mean, I would go to you before you would ever come to me.
So I'll speak to what Martin was talking about a little bit, in that me, like many other people, learned about how to find Crown Land through Martin, and I spent 2 winters slogging around on snowshoes and cross-referencing Google satellite map drop pins with the Crown Land Atlas. 2 miserable slogging snowshoe winters with my poor dog, so that I could find, out of probably the 36 places I went to explore, find 3 absolute gems. And Martin's right, the reward is absolutely always worth it. And so I feel the same way as Martin, in that when you're telling people about the attributes of Crown Land, that needs to come with the reward of going and finding those spots for yourself. And the reason I say that is because unlike provincial parks where people just kind of feel like they have a right to go to, they pay to play, you leave, goodbye, so long. If someone spends the time to go and find that spot that feels special to them because of the effort they've put into it, then the more likely they are to want to conserve it. And by that, I mean not litter it, not litter, not trash it, not decimate it in terms of harvesting wood, not tell 30 other people out of their partying group of friends about it, etc., etc. I mean, that's ideally my hope and my idea behind the whole, oh, you want to know about current land? Here's how you find it, and now go find your spots.
That's a good way to put it. I think a lot of it is about if you're going to learn conservation, I think part of it actually comes from that search, right? That's kind of what we're getting at. If you're trying to be a responsible person in the wilderness and in nature, trying to be minded toward all this stuff, you learn a lot of those lessons by finding something that's actually precious to you. If you can't make those things precious to you, either by spending a long time to find them or by seeing something bad happen to a similar place, which has happened to me, it doesn't really matter to you. And like Pine Martin was getting at earlier at the beginning of the stream, it seems like a lot of people lack the right kind of motivation to do anything about it. And that's, in my opinion, why. Because they don't understand just how precious some of these things can be and how easy it is to absolutely destroy them.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny you bring that up, Tyler, because in some cases there are very clear reasons people don't want to do the conservation thing. I keep thinking I still have a day job. I sit in a cubicle in a tech company out in the techno park here in Montreal, and they're putting in a light rail system that sort of goes off island and out to the West End and all this stuff as a way of, everyone's trying to get people out of their cars and into public transit because obviously the ecological footprint of a bus is lower than having 40 cars on the road. But the station they're putting in right next to where I work, tore out a green heron nesting swamp.
Oof. That's a shame.
Which, because it's like the technopark butts right up against some protected land. And I don't know, someone in government...
How are you allowed to do that?
Huh?
Was there environmental assessment done for that?
Apparently so. I know that I wrote a very, very angry...
if it was a green heron nesting site, this is in... Where is this?
This is in Montreal. This was all over the news because the local environmental groups were trying to get this stopped. And
yeah, but by law, they can't touch that site. So...
Yeah, it's interesting. Kevin, if I can find the articles, I'll forward them to you. But it was a very big deal, obviously, for obvious reasons.
That's my background. I kind of do stuff like that, but it's like they can't do that. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry, I'm going to shut up now.
Yeah, one day, Kevin, I want to talk to you not in front of my entire viewership.
Are we live?
Because you know a lot of stuff that I want to know. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, what I'm saying is that there are so many instances where the drive to conserve an area, any area, just pick imagine an area in your head that you want to conserve, and it just luckily happens to be in the wrong spot pertaining to putting in a new metro or whatever a metro is in English, subway system or a light rail or a frickin' highway. And the numbers are behind the guys who are for the progress, right? Who have to put in that highway because they need to increase trucking from here to there so that they can, take some of the pressure off this highway that was designed in the 50s and can't handle 2 million cars a day anymore. So they're trying to sort of get some of the pressure off, and so they're going to put a highway through here. There's all these reasons why a piece of land that isn't a national park or whatever becomes easy to just take out.
Put up a parking lot.
Exactly. Damn
Yeah.
it! I was gonna finish with that.
Sorry.
The old Joni Mitchell go-to. There we go. But no, that brings up a good question. Is that you know, and
Hey, Dennis is here.
Martin the philosopher has suddenly checked out of the conversation.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that.
You had to go poo.
No, he's going to grab his PhD in philosophy off the wall and present it to us.
Really?
I'm hoping. Huh?
Well, then I have to poo then.
Oh, for God's sakes, are we still?
No. What I'm saying is that no one has drawn a line, and it just seems to be impossible to draw a line between the benefit of human progress versus the conservation of the natural world. And there's never a good answer, because the answer is always the answer, unless it's an extreme case, always seems to be, oh, well, there's a deer yard here, but oh, fuck it, we've got lots of deer. Everyone's got deer. There's deer all over. We're just gonna put this here, and it doesn't matter if we interrupt the deer yard, because there's deer all over the place. And then it goes on down the line. Oh, well, there's porcupine. Porcupines are all over the place. That's not an endangered species.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if we displace a pile of porcupines. And then it just seems to go on down a list of what everyone thinks we have enough of in terms of wild animals versus the value to human commerce, essentially.
Well, that's the thing, right? What we need to do is find a way to monetize. I don't like that term, but to put a numerical value on land that is left natural, left undestroyed.
But that's why we need to get people in the wilderness. It's intrinsic value, and intrinsic value is not monetized. You can't put money on that. You need people to reconnect with nature. If more and more people get out nature, they will get pissed off when they start killing the green herons, and they will fight for you. But there's three ways to fight, right? You can do the lobbying groups. Hey, legally, you shouldn't do that. You can do the Greenpeace, which is actually it's illegal, but they actually wait to be arrested. And then there's that civil disobedience, and then there's eco-sabotage, where people saying, that's it, turn your cheek and you get a sore face. So there's all those different levels. A lot of people come to me and they say, Kevin, you need to help us do this, whatever. I always sit on the fence, because that's what I'm good at. I'm always sort of saying, well, here's this side, here's the side.
Oh, jeez, you're so Canadian there, Kevin.
Well, I'm also from the School of Natural Resources. I worked as a forester and worked in fish and wildlife. So I get that, and I get those people that are working those jobs. I get all that. But there's days when I wake up and it's like, bury myself in sand and chain myself to a bulldozer. I get that too. But it's the same thing as we need to keep that going, and that create that zeal-like feeling of actually, putting the spike in the dam, saying.
But okay, but at what point here do we just stop saying, we need to figure out a different way? I don't remember anyone chaining themselves to the Blockbuster video store, and I don't remember anyone chaining themselves to the company that made phone books, and I don't remember anyone chaining themselves to the place that made fucking horse cart wheels, right? So why is there this huge disconnect?
There's totally different people that actually work in that mindset. I'll give you here's a funny story to just sort of put at ease with this. Years ago, and you guys will be amazed with this one, I happened to be arrested and thrown in a cop cruiser for assault.
Wait.
I don't believe it.
Say that again.
Look at me. I'm very powerful.
Tell us more.
Okay, no, and this means a lot. Okay, so stop laughing. This is very serious. What happened was there was a guy at this trailer park that my parents were having a trailer at, and he got upset with my wife at the time, and I'm thinking this guy's all messed up, and he was really not all there. So I grabbed him by the arm, I turned around, and I said, hey, if you're going to yell at anybody, in fact, why she was yelling and they were yelling is that he didn't give PFDs to them to go and use a canoe, and I didn't think that was proper. So I turned around and I said, hey, yell at me. And so he did. And then half hour later, and this is a quick version of the story, cop cruiser pulls in. Are you Kevin Callan? Yes. Handcuffs me, throws me in the cruiser, right? I went, what's going on? Well, we're arresting you for assault. My problem, and you guys would find this really funny, I told him everything. Whoa! Wrong idea, right? Wrong idea. So I go, why are you charging me with assault? Well, you did touch him, and therefore you assaulted him. I went, what?
Yeah.
And so then the female officer got stung by a wasp. She has an allergic reaction. I said, take the handcuffs off, and I can give first aid. I know how to do the EpiPen, so I did. They put away the ambulance. Then they put the handcuffs back on me and put me back in the cruiser. I went, are you nuts? What's wrong? Well, I just saved your colleague. And they're like, yes. But they said, the cop said, it's not my job to judge you. It is my job to arrest you and the judge to judge you. And so I went, this is all to do with the environment, isn't it? Like, so what we're talking about is like, do you fight for the environment or not? Or do you be smart about it, right? So what happened was, I went, okay, so what's up? They go, well, you're a teacher, and actually, I found this not to be the truth at the time, but the cop did say, if you're charged with assault, you can't go and teach anymore. So I said, well, I need the job, so what do I need to do? Well, the guy said, if you apologize and say that he's right and you're completely wrong, then we'll drop the charges. I went, okay, but you don't know me very well. Handcuffs came off, and I went to hit him. I thought, I might as well do the crime. If I might as well do the crime, right? But I missed, and then they put me back in the cruiser, and it was just terrible. But I learned a valuable lesson that actually I don't. You know what? I had no answer with this whole thing tonight.
Well, one thing I do want to say on the legal side of you being arrested and everything is that even if a cop thinks that you're going to get off because you will, he can't make that decision himself. Like, I know people who've been arrested on firearms charges, and clearly they were not going to jail, but the cops can't just take the cuffs off. Like, their hands are tied. They have to, because there's a machine behind them.
Oh, it was the machine. I can see that happening. I shouldn't say that. At the time, I didn't, but now I do.
No, in hindsight, you do.
I think this goes back to a kind of more, unfortunately, I want to say
Start again.
I want to say it goes back to a little bit more of a philosophical start to the conversation, but unfortunately, I think in our society it becomes a little bit more biblical. Is this machine that tells us that the machine is more important than the natural environment started with colonialism and the idea that that man was given dominion over the earth. Yes, and we're fighting that idea to this day, because as Hap Wilson once told me, and I had a conversation with him about logging roads and recently, and he just goes, I get so tired of having to fight our own government to protect the land we live on. You can tell he has so much passion in him, but he's been doing it for so long that he's just exhausted. Mm-hmm. Why should we have to fight our own government to protect the environment that we breathe the air in?
Especially, by the way, Nate, you're absolutely right. And it's especially because technically we're the boss. We hire these guys every 4 years.
Right. But it goes back so much further to this idea that in so many of these government laws and provisions, and indeed that even maybe back to some of these rights that these quote unquote rights that Martin has alluded to, and that we've given the government the dominion over so many of these decisions, and unfortunately so much of that foundation is built on this old kind of like biblical idea or colonial idea, in that
the earth is here for us.
We've somehow been given this dominion over the land or over the the lesser cultures around us when we got here, and we're going to pay the price for it dearly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's like Thoreau said, right? I mean, if you find the law unjust, then break the law. But at the same time, who goes through the red light at 4 o'clock in the morning? A lot of people are like, well, it's against the law, but nobody's going to know. And so there's a fine line there. There's a very fine line. And there's mornings where I wake up where I'm going, again, bury myself in sand and tie myself with the bulldozer. And the other is I want to join the government and actually work with them, right? I don't know the answer. So,
Martin, yeah. I'm curious as to Martin is starting to scratch his head, so I'm curious now.
Oh God, are you all right?
Yeah. I got a lot of thoughts. I mean, I'm not very good at being concise, so cut me off at any point. But
I don't think anyone here is going to want to cut you off, Martin.
Okay, well, I can be a bit verbose, so forgive me if I am. Nate, that thing you said about this sort of antiquated way, really it's a biblical way in the West, it's a biblical view of regarding humans as having dominion over the natural world. And it's not just the idea that humans have dominion over the natural world, but that humans are not part of the natural world, right? Sort of within this religious philosophical cosmology, humans are, maybe a little less than angels. But I think if you sort of steep yourself in the principles of evolutionary ecology and understand some Darwinism, for instance, you'll understand that it's not that we're a little less than angels, we're a little more than apes, right? And I think it's important to have a scientific, first and foremost, a scientifically realistic picture of what we are and our place in the world. This is not some wooish, twaddly, new age, feel good, everything's interconnected. I hate that stuff. That makes me want to puke, that kind of talk. I don't like that kind of woo and
Tell us how you really feel, Martin.
But yeah, well, sorry, I'm not.
Didn't hold back.
I'm maybe a little unguarded in my opinions here, but I mean, I think it is important to have a scientifically realistic picture of the natural world, which includes us in it as animals, first and foremost, as a recent arrival on the scene as a species with a peculiar adaptation, namely this enormous brain that lets us control our environment in unprecedented ways. But there has come a conceit with that culturally. We have inherited this idea that we're not part of the natural world. We transcend the natural world, and so we have dominion over it. And religions have sort of sanctified this idea by saying, yes, God himself, who created the world and created us in it, created the world for us, has authorized us to have dominion over it. That, I think, is a view that even the religious should be ashamed of. So even if you are a religious person, I'm not, but if you are a religious person, you should understand that that is an archaic way of thinking that was written into a lot of sacred scriptures, and you need to purge yourself of that way of thinking. I mean, surely the Bible, it doesn't, and books like it don't include only wisdom. They include some falsehoods, some archaic and ancient primitive ways of thinking about us, born of ignorance of what people were and what the world was like. We've come a long way, and so I think people need to learn some science. They need to learn some biology. They especially need to learn some evolutionary ecology. Go out and read some books by Richard Dawkins, not the stuff against religion, forget that stuff, but read his biology stuff. Read the works of Stephen Jay Gould, for instance. Dawkins wrote The Selfish Gene, and works like The Selfish Gene and the Extended Phenotype and stuff like that. Forget his screeds against religion. I don't think those are really very good.
Well, when you talked about the biblical stuff.
Yeah,
Tyler first, and then I'll say something.
So Dauber actually touched on it, and I was going to say this. So I grew up in a very scholarly point of view, biblical family who's very Christian, and whether or not you choose to believe in that stuff is none of my business. But having grown up in that family, my dad was and is a pastor. A lot of the words that were put into Bibles of the time, so around the time of the Vulgate being turned into an English or a common man's Bible, those words were placed there Essentially because the people who were placing them wanted to maintain their ideals about society. And if they accurately translated a lot of those manuscripts, you would have ended up with ideas that maybe man shouldn't be so dominant over nature. Maybe we should have respect for our surroundings. Maybe we should respect the things we're given. But that wasn't the case. But Dauber actually said it. So in Genesis, the phrase dominion is almost entirely a mistranslation. The most accurate translation I know of is steward. It's steward. And I don't remember if it's in the NASB or something like that, but the newer translations have actually fixed a lot of this.
It's in the it's in the newer New International Version where it's translated to steward. But I think for all our baby boomer generation, that might be a little too late at this point.
But yeah, that's exactly the thing. So it is NASB and it's NIV and stuff like that where they've corrected this. But to call it a biblical ideal is not entirely wrong, because that's what existed in like the texts that people hold so dear for so long. So part of our jobs as conservators at this point is trying to undo the wrongs that were put there by people who wanted to maintain positions of colonialism and power. The deal is we can't even say I respect your holy book I respect your point of view for your holy book, because it no longer is the case. We actually are trying to actively undo some of these ideas now. And I think as conservators, you're right. You know, people do need to go learn some science and some biology and read some Richard Dawkins and, you know, get their heads around this stuff because it's important. P.S. Jess has left the live stream. Glad you all could attend the live stream mutiny. Simon, Dauber, and I will actually be leading the channel. Oh, shoot, there he is.
Sorry about that, guys. Screaming baby.
Nothing to do here.
Sorry, I didn't know where my wife was, but she got to the baby.
We're talking about what to do with dishes.
Dishes.
Yeah.
Wash them.
No. Where do you wash your dishes? We'll start with Nate.
When camping, where do you wash your dishes?
Yeah.
Sandy Creek. That's where I wash them.
It has to be a trick question. In the dishwasher?
No, at the campsite.
When you're in the bush.
Oh my God, man! What?
No, I have a.
Nate packs really heavy. He brings the dishwasher and a generator.
I can see him with an aluminum pack frame,
Hey,
and all of his stuff piled like 8 feet up.
I have seen him haul a considerable load in very, very deep snow on snowshoes this winter. I had the pleasure of camping with him. He's a big strapping guy. I'm sure he could portage that.
I'm probably the shortest person on this live stream right now.
I did not.
I did not even bring any beer in that load either.
I don't believe you.
No. There's no way you didn't bring beer. Really?
I did not bring a single beer. Ask Martin. It's true.
Okay, so Nate, you do not wash your dishes in the lake or the river, right?
No, of course not. I wash them in a collapsible sink with biodegradable soap, at least 100 feet from shore, and then I ditch the used water far inland, and that's that. I learned my lesson the hard way on that one, and I keep having. And this is so just so you guys know. Or you probably know already, but I'm the store manager at Algonquin Outfitters in Huntsville. Today was our official last day of actually being open, so we are all now technically laid off and not working at Algonquin Outfitters.
Now, are you guys going to have to go into EI?
At a certain point, yes. Yeah, we are.
Man, I feel for you guys. I'm in essential service, so I'm working for the whole damn time. But I thank the gods that I don't have to worry about EI right now.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're in that position. Hope we're in I'm fortunate that we're in a better position than a lot of other folks out there. So we're in a tight spot, but there's a lot of folks that have it worse, and we'll be raring to go as soon as all this is over. But sorry, what I was alluding to there is just top of mind. That was just top of mind today, as it was the last day we were all there together. So, but yeah, top of mind is that you would not believe the amount of people that we sell camp suds to that have a firm belief that they can just go and use that in the water.
But I understand that, because before I got a clue, I would have been that person. As soon as you throw biodegradable on something, people just automatically think, man, I'm home free. And it's even people who know a lot can fall into that if they're not careful.
So you literally, I educate my staff on this as much as I can. Anyone that walks up to the till with some, you'd be surprised at the amount of weathered, experienced people that walk up with a giant bottle of soap suds, and then when you kind of casually mention, oh hey, you know that these aren't water soluble, right? And then they go, what? Water soluble?
Well, look at how many old timers used to get, like, if you're rehafting an axe, you cut it off, and then, well, to get that, the wood out from the eye, I just throw it in the fire. And
right.
I'm like, hello, temper,
Yeah.
So I'm not really that surprised by what you're saying, Nate. I mean, they're two very, very different contexts, but they're two sides of the same coin. Like, weathered people, these sort of, I've been doing this for 30 years, and you ain't going to tell me how to do this. Yeah. Sometimes have the worst philosophy, but they've been doing it for 30 years, so you cannot tell them to change it.
Like Kevin, and I'm sure you've and my recent, I've been listening to the Cliff Jacobson talk you and Paul Curley have both had with him lately. And I mean, someone that's so far ingrained in canoe tripping culture and the experience they have, how do you educate someone like that on the facts of water solid or biodegradable versus water soluble? Like, how do you do that to someone that goes, I've tripped Quetico for 17 days, and what have you done lately, Senator?
Yeah, it's what I tell my students when they get racist. I say, quit speaking out of your father's mouth.
Oh, that is so beautiful. Can I use that?
I don't know. But it's true. It's like if you don't want to change, then society won't change, and you're the wrong, not the right.
Mm-hmm.
So if I did this, we did this. I get that. Actually, in all honesty, like I find myself doing that as well, but I do it for the better. Like I had my dad with a teenager, right? And she'll say this, and I'll say, no, hey, we did this in the day. Well, that was the day, Dad. I went, but that was wrong, and that was right. So I'm not doing it like I'm using the history as a benefit, not as a negative, right? So, yeah.
Well, and the thing is, to a lot of these old timers, dude, it's worked for me for 40 years. Now you're going to tell me it doesn't work?
Well, there wasn't thousands of people in Algonquin Park back then either. There was like probably 2 people paddling around there.
I'm not talking against you here, Kevin. I'm just giving a little.
No. I'm actually trying to defend the old guys. Like, I mean, they're not evil people. They really aren't. Like, if you go around the campfire with them, they're not really evil people. They're really quite nice people. But
they're just wrong.
Sure. For 40 years, they had no way to know it wasn't working.
Yeah.
Well, remember back in the 70s. Okay, how many of you guys remember this back in the 70s? You bring a bunch of beer bottles to a campsite with you, and then you bury them. Anyone remember this?
I actually have a YouTube video where I was on a Crownland campsite, and there was a hump. This was an old Crownland campsite that I had reestablished. It had sort of become overgrown, and there was this mysterious hump.
I bet you it was full of stubbies.
And it was full of stubbies from the 70s, yeah. And that's because that's what people used to do. That's what loggers used to do. It's what campers used to do. I mean, some of the old books, recommend that. Deep six your tin cans. Books that recommended. I mean, as a child, I can remember going camping, and this is what I used to do because this was the practice. We didn't bring bottles in; they were too heavy. But you'd bring canned food in, cans of beans and Spam and stuff like that. And what did you do with the cans? You threw them in the fire and burned them, and you crushed them, and then you left them in the fire pit.
Yep.
That was the practice, and that was the recommended ecological wisdom of the day, right into the 70s.
The running joke we have, actually, and this sounds so negative, but it'd be funny. There's so many positive older people that I know, so I don't mean this to be negative, but it is quite comical. I've been at meetings where we'll talk to one individual. There will be hundreds of other older people that will be willing to change for good reason, and they'll be the one, right? And the running joke is, well, he's going to die soon, so.
Well, the thing is, yeah,
No, but that is how revolutions happen in ideas.
I
right?
know.
We're involved.
Oh.
We're involved in a war of ideas where we want sort of certain ecological attitudes to win the day, and what that means is that certain outmoded ideas have to go, but usually they go. Ideas die hard, right? And old wisdom that has served people well and throughout their lives is not going to be abandoned readily. Those people literally have to die off, and what that means is we have to make sure that we propagandize correct messages about this stuff. At some point, I want to correct something about what Nate said about water solubility and soap, because there's a factual inaccuracy there that I want to correct. But he's stepped away, so we can wait till he gets back.
And I noticed he's got a Hudson's Bay blanket, which I do not have.
No, that's fake. It's gonna be fake. That's not real.
Maybe it's real.
No, it's real. I've seen it.
It's real?
Yeah. He brought it on a winter camping trip. It's real.
Well, that's a Walmart blanket.
No.
I want two of them. I want a queen size for the bed here in the house, and then I want like a twin size or something to take to the woods.
Just you dream like a gold digger dreams.
I fucking do. Oh, jeez, I just used the language too.
Oh, there goes the whole night. We can't use
Warning, will cause language.
Was the outdoor I
Outdoor
can't
dauber?
Don't just bury your beer bottle, smash
it with a rock.
That's progression.
Yep. Yeah, but it's just because it comes back to, we talk about conservation, we talk about environmentalism, but the generational question is so heavy. Like, my parents' generation grew up in a very different world than I do, and what they grew up with has been working for them, and they don't want to be told by David Suzuki how to live. Essentially, sorry, Tyler, he's a Canadian.
Meh.
He has a show on the CBC. He's a scientist, and he's very into the environmental thing. But you know what I'm saying? Like, there are some very reasonable people of that age who grew up in a different bloody time, and they don't want to be told that the way they grew up was wrong. I don't want to be told that the way I grew up was wrong, right? And I know that when my kids, let's just say the elder daughter, when she's like 18 and the world has changed, she's going to blame me for certain things. When she's 24 and the world has really changed, she's going to blame me for certain things. Because let's face it, baby boomers grew up in a world where there was plenty and we weren't going to kill the place. I'm Generation X. I'm like the last dying days of Generation X. We were the ones who had the opportunity to change that stuff, and we didn't do it because we were too busy being what Generation X is. And every generation sort of will have this sort of thing thrown in their face where the way you grew up is wrong on certain levels. Pick your level. And the level of that we're dealing with right now, level is the wrong word. Aspect, maybe, context. The context or level or aspect that we're dealing with right now has to do with conservation, has to do with environmentalism, has to do with climate change. Like, that's just luck of the draw. That's boom. We're alive in the time when that's the big question that is causing the whole kerfuffle.
So are you worried that given the situation that we're going through right now, and given the fact that the way world population is going, we're probably possibly in our lifetimes going to go through this exact same situation, if not more so again. Are you worried that at a certain point, like you know, we're eventually just going to say F it to the whole conservation thing in the economic interests of a country or a nation state or the world. We're just going to say F it. We all just need our internet.
I anticipate it'll get to revolutionary standards before that.
I'm afraid that that's exactly what's going to happen, Nate. So I'm glad to hear Tyler say what he's saying, because he's a generation below me.
We're all too young and angry to let it get to that point. Like the generation before me is like, you think it's hilarious to lose so much money in the stocks because of environmental issues. I'm like, dude, we can't even afford a house. I'm laughing at your stocks.
Yeah.
So I think it possibly my generation or the one directly below it will be the one to start riding at the doors of the rich and say this is enough, because we're too angry to not.
Yeah, and I feel that like the role I'm playing in my life is I'm doing what I can. I know that I can't do everything. I know that we can't save the world, but we can maybe mitigate the damage. So I do live with a certain amount of guilt because I adore my kids. And I know that their world will be much more brutal and poverty-stricken and dirty. I'm using dirty as a very simple term because when I start to talk about this stuff, I get really kind of... so I live my life so that when the inevitable day comes when Camille turns to me as a young adult and says, "What the hell were you doing when my world was being destroyed?" I can say I did what I could. I couldn't save you, but I couldn't save the world, but I did what I could. I cleaned my own act up as much as I could without giving up on everything.
Oh, fair enough. Kevin, this awkward question for you.
Yeah.
Because tonight hasn't been awkward at all.
No. I really felt for his statement there.
Awkward question, but not about poop. Do you ever think 15, 20 years from now when you're walking when you're cruising around on your walker around the park there, you'll wish you had done more?
No, you don't know me personally, but I'm a workaholic, so, and I don't do it for money because I have no money, and maybe that's a bad thing for my life. Things have gone whatever wrong.
I'm just alluding to the fact that you sometimes you've kind of mentioned that, you know, you want to work between the two elements of the different, you know,
No, Nate. I know my character. After a certain amount of years of knowing yourself, especially being by yourself, you get to know yourself. I'm not that person. It might be. I might wake up one morning and say, "Yeah, I'm going to bury myself in the sand." But I know my abilities and disabilities, and I know that I can do better by doing what I'm doing. I knew that long ago. I was criticized a long time ago for being the silly guy. And I knew being the silly guy got the crowds. And I knew I'm a very serious person, actually. I'm actually not a dumb person. But being the silly person got the crowds. And all these people criticized me saying, "You're the commoner of the canoe world." I went, "Yeah." And I got how many people in my audience? And what did you get? And I know what I did was changing everything. I did it subconsciously, though. Doing it consciously, that's narcissistic. Doing it subconsciously is not, right? So, no, I got no regrets. My regrets about it is, you know, what you guys are saying is right. It's like the young people. I spend my time around young people, and I really admire them. I know that they're all different and messed up like we were when we were kids. But
that's the thing, right? Like we were when we were kids.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, there's some blaming us, but I don't know if they're blaming individuals. They're blaming the society of our consumerism, and it's true. Way too many people, way too many things. Nature has finally told us, and we should not be talking about this tonight because everybody else is talking about it. We should not. But nature is saying, "Hey, wake up! Yeah. It's what's it called? What's Gaia? Gaia is the whole idea of the Earth will not be destroyed. The Earth will destroy the species that is destroying it." Yeah. And I believe in that.
I do too. Absolutely do.
Okay, Martin, I would love your take on that, actually. Either from a scientific perspective or more from just a holistic perspective.
On the Gaia thing, or the
No,
guilt
I mean the fact that due to a fantastic number of reasons, whether it's our population or what we consume, that we're in the situation we are right now, and how that might occur again based on the lessons we probably won't learn from this.
Yeah, I am not as sanguine as Tyler is about this. I have a much more pessimistic view. I think that we are going to have to run headlong into the wall before we change our ways. I don't think we will willingly change our ways, and that's because I think the incentives to proceed as we are doing are immediate and obvious, and the threat of ecological disaster and collapse is sort of dim and unobvious, and it's not very reinforcing. It does not incentivize you. Whereas the prospect of having some shiny new toy and stuff like that, or enriching yourself or something like that, that is an immediate thing. So I think it's a matter of the incentive structure of the world around us. So I think we can mitigate that. I think sort of efforts to get people to understand some biology and some evolutionary ecology can mitigate that. I think getting people out into nature so that they, as Kevin said, see the intrinsic value in the natural world instead of seeing it merely as a resource or a playground can mitigate that. But I think we're going to run headlong into an ecological disaster on many fronts. And I think that some of the solutions that are being put forward now, that many very well-intentioned, well-meaning people think are the right solutions, like everyone should live in cities, we should all become vegetarians or vegans. I think that these are catastrophic mistakes that are exacerbating the problem, because there's no greater destructive ecological force that we have ever come across, that we've ever invented, than agriculture. Every time a shovel hits the ground, there is degradation of soil. We are destroying the world's topsoil. People don't appreciate that in Canada's prairies, the topsoil was measured in feet, 14 feet, 20 feet. It's now measured in inches.
Yeah.
And you cannot make soil. And the amount of desertification that's happening on the planet is greater than is a greater threat than climate change, and it is probably the principal cause of climate change. So I think scientifically there are solutions here, but most people are not motivated by science. They're motivated by a lot of feeling, and there's a lot of resentment. And then people think, well, if we just destroy capitalism, or if we just pull down the fat cats, the rich people, and eat the rich, that will fix things. And I don't think that's right. The incentive structures are wrong.
Hey, I like the idea of feeding the rich.
I have to say, eating the rich probably won't hurt.
Yeah, that's true. Some new people will acquire their wealth.
Yeah, and it brings us around to kind of a sensitive topic right now. Is the social media concept of going outside and being outside more of is it a help right now to this kind of cause or idea, or is it a total hindrance? And I have a couple ideas around that, but I guess I'm right in the thick of it, so I don't know how other people are kind of seeing it from the outside right now. Kevin, I know you're right in the thick of it as well, especially right now, but I don't know how. But
Nathan, what have I done the last few days? Did I actually do a video of how I'm going to survive in the wilderness? Did I go off in the what did I do? I actually created a bunch of videos on how to educate people to calm their nerves.
But
I think one more video of this is how I'm going to do to bug out. Mm-hmm. I'm going to lose it on them.
I mean, but no, Kevin. I mean, that was, I've been watching those videos, and that was, I think, a good thing to do, because I watched your Facebook page, and as soon as everything happened, you just said, here's what I'm doing for my students. Here's what I'm going to put online, and here's what you can watch.
And by the way, I have watched those videos.
Yeah, and here's what anyone from a 4-year-old to a 62-year-old can watch and actually retain something from. I can't watch a video right now of someone going to the grocery store and grabbing a bag of rice and then running off into the forest and building a fort will do for me right now.
It's scary. It's scary. We're all afraid, and actually to keep me sane. Like I hope you guys are enjoying those ID videos, even if it don't matter. But I spend my day doing them because I know my students will fail the course if I don't do this.
No, but here's the thing. I mean, you're doing the right thing, and other people are ostensibly doing the panicking thing. But like, it just makes me wonder. I mean, are any of those good for the cause of conservation in the sense that we're talking about? You know, where if people don't know about it, then they don't care about it.
Okay, I have a couple of things to say about that, and then I know that everyone else here does. So I just want to get in on the ground floor of what you're saying, Nate. Two things I want to say. One is, I think that if people can use the time we have right now where nothing is open to actually discover the woods or the seaside or any natural environment, then that will create in some of them a connection that they will then work on. And hey, I haven't been camping in like 30 years. You want to try that next summer? Sure. And, you know, in some of those people, because I'm someone whose connection with the outside world, whose journey to bushcraft, whose journey to conservation and environmentalism was sparked by a very specific nothing event when I was 16 in a subalpine meadow in Manning Park in British Columbia. Like a nothing event. But I recognize that it started the pebble or the snowball rolling down the hill. I'm trying to find a metaphor for you guys, and it's going like shit. But where I am today started then, and I didn't even notice it at the time. So if 3% of the people who are like, well, there's nothing else to do, so let's go take a walk in the forest. If in 3% of those something really starts to happen, then that's people who will care. What I was going to say about, oh, bugger it, I've forgotten. I'm sorry, but I've been drinking scotch the entire time we've been doing it.
Hey, that's all right. You know what? I just wanted to say, I mean, I have a pretty modest Instagram following, but given my content, I've had a lot of messages from friends of mine just personally, but people I know just through Instagram saying, do you have any advice? Do you have anything I could learn from? Do you have anything I can watch? Martin alluded to this earlier in that I kind of I made a list of stuff you can watch right now to be entertained, but also to learn from. Kevin, you were on there, but specifically, I had a friend of mine who messaged me and said she's got an 11-year-old kid at home that she wants to actually start teaching this stuff to. Where the hell do I go? What do I watch? And so, Kevin, your channel was a great one. Everything from how to size a paddle to, and Martin, a lot of your just really basic campcraft stuff is something that people are just all of a sudden seem so hungry for. And I can't think that that's a bad thing, as long as it doesn't stray too far into the nether world of survivalism,
Thank you, Nate. Okay, I'm going to say this because I just remembered what I wanted to say, and then I want to hear from you guys. I have unsubscribed from 3 channels recently over their coverage of the current situation because they've gone in for the panic. I'm buying myself some ammunition. I think each of us, I have a very small following compared with everyone else on this channel, but I still consider myself to be someone with a following. So my coverage, I have a video that will go out at some point whenever I have time to edit it that I shot a couple of nights ago with my daughter. My coverage of the situation we're in right now with what I call the T virus, because I'm funny that way, I'm very careful to keep it non-sensationalist. There's no panic. I'm very stressed. I have a daughter with an immune system problem, but I'm not. The world isn't ending. I'm not buying ammunition, and I'm not telling anyone else to buy ammunition. I'm not going full on survivalist, and I find that channels that are going that way are doing everyone a disservice, because every channel with even 5 viewers has followers whose philosophies you may damage, because everyone is looked up to by someone else, right? Even someone like me is looked up to by someone else. I've got a couple of kids who look up to me, and I'm the way I deal with my followers and the way I deal with my daughters in terms of that is the same. I want to only give the kind of information that I think will not damage anything. So I'm like, yes, be careful. Wash your damn hands. I mean, my hands are cracking and falling to pieces, okay? But, there are channels out there that are spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And that is not the positive here. The positive is channel life. Man, Kevin, your Facebook page is one of my favorite things right now, because you have been handed a pile of crap. Hey, you can't teach right now. You can't go into the forest right now. You can't do your speaking tours. How the hell is Kevin gonna pay his mortgage? I'll tell you what, instead of worrying about that and doing nothing and, tail spinning into stress, he's putting out videos of bird IDs.
And yet he makes lemonade,
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, when the crap hits the fan, there are
I like that. I thought that's explain that comment.
What do you mean?
I like that comment.
Well, because it's like
No, the lemonade thing.
Oh, sure, yeah.
It's the drinking bird.
Yeah.
When life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Well, it seems like you've been handed a bowl of not lemons, and yet you make lemonade.
I love that. That's fantastic. You must be an educator.
I am an educator, actually. I'm a music teacher.
There you go.
But I mean, Kevin, you know what I'm saying? Like, there are so many. Like, if I'm dumping channels off my subscription page, it's because I feel very strongly about this. I spend all my time stiff upper lipping the situation we're in right now, because kids pick up on the stress, and I see channels just diving into there's this sort of disaster porn in a way, like people who are watching the news and getting all, and then there's your channel, which is like this. Hey, here's how you ID birds by their songs.
So I know, I know, and I, like you, I deeply appreciate Kevin's take on this, and I've been doing my part to actually spread it around to people that are asking for worthwhile content to watch right now. I'm curious on Martin's take on anything he's been seeing and watching on social media lately pertaining to this.
Well, my involvement in all of this about the virus and all that was to sort of sound the alarm. So I was my wife is very, she has a background in biology, so she was on top of this story way, way, way back when it first started, before it really made a big sensation over here. And so I was privy to that because she did all the digging. And I was like, this is really worrisome. So I was sort of sounding the alarm, telling people we need to be careful, we need to practice social distancing. So I actually posted a handful of things encouraging people to do this. And then, of course, then it was all over the media, and no one needed me to keep talking about that. So I haven't been doing anything to sort of distract people or sort of put a more positive spin. I haven't been doing anything particularly constructive. I've been sick for the last 3 weeks, actually. And I'm frankly a little bit worried that I might have COVID-19, actually. No, I haven't really been doing much except watching a ton of stuff. I've been just watching a ton of stuff myself. But what I've been watching is just is not edifying educational or instructive. I've been watching Kevin's ID videos, which are fantastic. I commend them to anybody.
Fabulous.
But I've just been just steeping myself in a lot of stupid, gossipy, dumb videos. A lot of stuff about Marvel comics and the politics of wokeness and political correctness and stuff like that, because I have an interest in that. So I've been steeping myself in that. I've sort of been distracting myself by kind of getting drunk on that kind of stuff, trying to sort of get away from the COVID-19 stuff.
Me too.
And I haven't been putting any sort of positive content out there or recommending anything. So no, maybe I should. Something to think about.
No, I wasn't saying. Sorry, Martin. I wasn't asking what you're doing about it. I was just kind of wondering what your take on it was, out of anything that you have been watching. That's all.
Oh, about the COVID thing?
Yeah.
Oh, my take-home message is that there's nothing to fear but fear itself. This is a very serious disease. We need to flatten the curve. People need to follow these recommendations of social distancing. Nobody should be going out and hoarding anything. There are shortages right now, but these are all artificial shortages by people suddenly demanding quantities of things that they don't need in large quantities, and that's what's creating these artificial shortages and artificially empty shelves. There is no shortage. There's nothing that's actually going wrong. The economy is kind of in a hole right now, but that's because everyone has sort of been told don't go to work and stay home, so nobody is spending. But this is not a correction in the market the way we had in 2008, for instance, when the housing bubble happened and we had these mortgage-backed financial instruments that just collapsed because they were just houses of cards, really founded on nothing. This is not the case. It's not that there's something particularly vulnerable about our economic system. What's wrong with our economic system is everyone just has to stay home and no one can buy anything, and people aren't getting paid. So I expect a slow, gradual, fairly painless recovery. I mean, it's going to be painful in that some people are going to have to, need government assistance to get them through things and stuff like that. But eventually we'll get some herd immunity to this, and we'll get this under control. There's a realistic possibility of a vaccine. No guarantee. The common cold is a coronavirus, and we've never found a vaccine for that.
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, people hear coronavirus now and they think automatically it's like, this is not the first coronavirus we've dealt with, guys.
Yeah, but we've been successful with some and not with others. Though the common cold is a coronavirus, and that is absolutely incurable. We just simply cannot find a vaccine, and people have been trying, as long as people have been able to identify that virus, people have not been able to find a vaccine for it. So there's no guarantee that we'll find a cure for this. So this virus is going to sort of come around and do the rounds periodically. But we will eventually get a herd immunity to it, so that it doesn't keep posing this degree of threat to our healthcare system. The idea is not to not get it. The idea is to not all of us get it at once
at the same time,
and crash the healthcare system so that people die needlessly because they can't get ventilators and there's not enough ICU beds, and people who don't even have COVID are dying because they can't get an ICU bed and stuff like that. That's what we want to do. We're all going to get this. Yeah. Just like we all get the flu and the common cold, we're all going to get this. It's just a matter of let's spread this out over time.
I've got to sign out for the evening. Everybody have a good night.
Yeah, I need to get going as well, actually.
Yeah, I mean, we're late. It's 23:22, so I guess we'll call it a night there. Thanks for everyone who came to hang out. Thanks to the panelists and Nate. Thanks for jumping in late. But yeah, thanks.
Oh, no, don't thank Nate. He just jumped in. He didn't jump in late. He just jumped in.
Yeah, okay. To hell with you, Nate.
Yeah. Nate's a party crasher.
Thanks for gate crashing, Nate. For all of you who are watching,
I'll see you in the bush tomorrow. I'm going to do probably a bit of like a little Instagram live thing tomorrow afternoon, just behind my house.
Nice. I'll keep an eye out for that.
All right.
So for everyone who is out there watching, I'll be back next Tuesday with the standard Beer Blaze and Bushcraft live stream, and we'll be back next month with another edition of the Unnamed Outdoors panel discussion. Thank you very much, everyone. For God's sake, stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.
Yeah, you too, guys. Be safe, okay? Be smart.
Bye.